The cards aren't even in hand yet, and the controversies are already piling up. And this one, I guess NVIDIA actually really thought it could get away with.
Get amazing prices on the brands you love at Micro Center. Micro Center has over 30,000 items in stock, including desktops, laptops, computer components, monitors, TVs, and more. Not sure which parts to choose for your next build? Then use Micro Center's custom PC builder to find compatible parts, create your parts list, add them to your cart, and use same-day pickup at one of Micro Center's 25 locations nationwide. And if you're not comfortable building it, one of Micro Center's professional builders can build it for you as fast as same day for a fee. And if you need ideas for a build, then head to Micro Center's Build Showcase for great build inspiration, or submit your build for others to see. And right now, new customers can receive a free 256GB SSD in-store only. To see everything that Micro Center has to offer, click the link in the description below.
Okay, so once again, at risk of screwing ourselves over and making NVIDIA mad at us and potentially not send us review cards, which I hope doesn't happen, but we're gonna talk about some stuff here. You might have noticed in our initial video, we didn't really touch on the 4080 12 gig versus 4080 16 gig because the downside about moving as fast as we did about making that video about a specific keynote and only reporting on what he showed in the keynote is the fact that sometimes some things go up later that then really kind of open your eyes to some things. So we know there's 4 cards right now already kind of announced: the 4090, the 4080 16 gig, and the 4080 12 gig. One of the things that made me kind of not really think about the 4080 12 gig and 16 gig being that big of a deal initially is the fact that it's kind of like how we have a 3080 12 gig and a 3080 10 gig right now. Essentially, core-wise, they're the same GPU. It's just one had 12 gigs of VRAM and one had 10 gigs of VRAM. So didn't seem all that odd to see a 4080 16 gig and 12 gig until you really start to dig deeper. If we talk about CUDA core counts alone, the RTX 4090 has 16,384 CUDA cores. What's interesting is the specs, they don't show me how many RT cores or how many tensor cores or any of that yet. Because initially on the CUDA core count alone already, this looks bad, and it might be potentially worse once we see the full actual die breakdown. The RTX 4080 16 gigabyte has 9,728 CUDA cores. Yeah, it's a lot less. So in my mind, that already means there's room there for 4080 Ti already. That's the 16 gigabyte variant. The RTX 4080 12 gig has 7,680 CUDA cores. Already calling it a 4080 is very disingenuous, because if it had been just a 12 gig versus 16 gig variant with the same core, then that means that you could call it a 4080. This is for a few reasons. One, the shave down progression here, the 4080 really is just a renamed 4070. And the thing is, I feel like NVIDIA just felt like it could change the name to whatever it wanted and get away with it. But this looks very bad in terms of buyer misleading. Because initially, if you're shopping for a 4080, and they don't put these CUDA core specs and stuff on the boxes, by the way. Let's say you're at Micro Center, like we were just at, looking at graphics cards, and you're holding both of these boxes in your hand. You'd be like, well, 4080, 4080, 12 gig, 16 gig. I don't think I need 16 gigs. So you put that back, you grab a 12 gig, you go, hey, it's cheaper. $1,200 versus $900, $300 cheaper. And you go, oh, I'm gonna grab that one because I don't need 4 gigs for $300. That's a bad deal. And you walk away not realizing you also got a completely different core. So for instance, when it comes to die naming with NVIDIA, the lower the number, the bigger the die. So it's kind of backwards. It's kind of like wire gauging. The bigger the wire, the thicker the wire, the lower the number on the gauge, right? So like a 4 gauge would be much thicker than like a 10 gauge. So the 16,384 CUDA core RTX 4090 is the AD102 core. The RTX 4080 with the 9,728 CUDA cores is the AD103. And then the RTX 4080 12 gig is the AD104. Here's the other funny thing. If you actually look at the core naming conventions of previous graphics cards, the 104 is typically where the 70 is. We saw this with the 600 series. There's so much history to talk about here. We saw this with the 600 series where the RTX, RTX, third generation RTX. It's weird to see a G in front of anything right now, but the GTX 680, for all intents and purposes of the way it was spec'd, the size of the die, the cut of the die, the name of the die was really more like a 660. But it was one of those where they had made such a jump with Kepler over Fermi that it looked like they just lowered the entire stack down on what they were making, kept the price up, and then because the generational improvement between Fermi and Kepler was so big, you could tell just by looking at the specs that it was just named higher, even though it was a lower end product. At the end of the day, it performed really well, so people still bought it because of the generational jump it was where expected. Then the 10 series came along, and the GTX 1066 gigabyte card was a thing, but then they launched a 1063 gigabyte, where NVIDIA was called out for all of this again, where the 1063 gig was also a shaved down core from a 1060, 6 gig. So again, looking at the boxes, and I think I made this exact video about the 10 series, where if you're a buyer and you're looking at the box, once again, they don't put specs on the box other than core count, or not even core count, just memory, how much VRAM is on the card, and what family it belongs to. They don't put like on the side of the box a full spec rundown. By the way, I feel like somehow the FTC or the Federal Trade Commission should start requiring this on the side of the box. I really do. I really do think the full spec rundown needs to be on the box because they have to be fully transparent, because when you name it the same as something and it's not the same as that thing, then it's disingenuous, it's misleading, and it's intentionally duping the buyer, as far as I'm concerned. But the 1060 6 gig versus the 3 gig was also a shaved down card with the same name and lesser performance. Lesser money, lesser performance makes sense, but it's the naming of it all that really has me upset. Because here's the thing. I feel like they could have called the 4090, fine. The RTX 4080 could have maybe been called a 4080 Ti. Again though, there's a big enough gap in the CUDA core spec that they're probably already planning on a 4080 Ti, so they can't really do that. And then the 4080 could have still been called, or 12 gig, could have still been called the 4080 12 gig, and then the 4080 Ti 16 gig. But the problem is that gap between the 4080 16 gig and the 4090 also being $1,200 versus $1,600 is $400 worth of room to put another card in there. So they couldn't do that. So instead of calling the 4080 12 gig a 4070 at $900, because we would have never seen a 70 series card launch at $900, the misleading duping attempt once again of NVIDIA saying our customers are stupid, they'll buy whatever we put out, of calling it a 4070, people would have called out the $900. So instead they changed the name thinking nobody would really, I think, call this out. There's also another possibility here. NVIDIA knows and they just don't give a frick. They don't care what you, the consumer, have to think about their naming scheme, because the pandemic has shown them that people will spend exorbitant amounts of money at a marked up rate to have a graphics card, and they're still selling, so who cares? At the end of the day, NVIDIA doesn't care if it's deep pockets buying their cards or average gamers buying their cards, as long as someone's buying the cards. The funny thing is, I've been reading a lot of comments on the 40 series launch videos. Mine, Steve's, Paul's. I don't know, did Linus do it? I didn't watch it, so whatever, it doesn't matter. I've been reading a lot of the comments on Twitter, on NVIDIA's own pages and stuff, their forums. So many people are saying, not only am I skipping 40 series, they're not even buying 30 series right now because they're really waiting for November when RDNA 3 launches. I feel like NVIDIA's in this really weird spot where, kind of how Intel was caught off guard with the whole like, we think people will just adopt the, let's just wait and see kind of a thing when it comes to Ryzen. I feel like NVIDIA doesn't really feel that AMD was ever a threat, but I think enough consumers now have kind of had just enough of the NVIDIA bullcrap when it comes to the marketing side and the management side and the general way they treat their customer side, that people are actually waiting now. One thing to mention here is the RTX 4080 12 gig does have a 2610 megahertz boost clock. Like the boost clocks on these, I can't perform. Here's the thing that sucks about this whole discussion. I love the product NVIDIA makes. I just wish it wasn't backed by so much just negativity. Just so much negativity around it. The product is awesome. The people engineering the products are awesome. The engineers, the employees working on this are awesome. It's just so much from the top makes it all look bad. 2610 megahertz boost clock. It took LN2 and custom BIOS and mods to make a 30 series come anywhere near that clock speed. 2.51 gigahertz boost clock on the 4080 16 gigabyte. It makes sense that the lesser dense core would have a higher clock speed because less cores. There's a whole reason why behind it, but lower end die cuts tend to boost higher for voltage reasons and all sorts of things. But 2.52 gigahertz boost clock on the 4090. And Jensen saying they've internally played around and overclocked it to over 3000 megahertz. I don't know if that's a golden sample. We're talking almost over 400 megahertz overclock. That's significant, but not what would be significant too is also the wattage. If it's 450 watt at these boost clocks, for the 4090. Imagine what it would be at 3,000. But he did say, regarding the price increases, now we're not talking about, I don't know, it's just weird because I mean, obviously with it being this much faster, they're gonna wanna capitalize on it. They are a for-profit company and they're gonna up the price according to, okay, if we're giving you 50% more performance, but we increase the price 20%, it's 50% more performance for 20% more money. That looks good on paper, but the problem is you do that long enough, you eventually price out your entire industry because you can't keep adding 20% cost every generation. So that's why when 30 series came out versus Turing, it looked so good because the price went from $1,200 for a 2080 Ti down to $600 for a 3080, which was so much faster. But now we've gone back to that other part of the cycle where now you have a starting price of the 4080 12 gig at $900, which is $300 more than a 3080, or $400 to $500 more than a 3070. But Jensen did say that the price of the 12-inch wafer has gone up at TSMC. That's true, because even if we look back here, December 15th, 2020, Tom's Hardware did put out an article here saying TSMC is reportedly terminating the discounts, like the volume discounts, and increasing prices. And I'd read that prices were increasing as much as 20%. So now let's say that you're NVIDIA, 20 series was a TSMC product, you're getting a volume discount because you're ordering millions of them, and then suddenly that volume discount's gone, so that's a price increase. And then you're brought back up to market value, plus a price increase on top of that. So it could be costing you 30% more. Let's not forget, 30 series was manufactured on Samsung. So now you're a customer that left, you went over the fence to where the grass looked greener, and now you're back. You're not necessarily TSMC's best interest to give you a deal at this point, because they know you need them. And so they're gonna gouge you. And who they're gouging is not NVIDIA, because NVIDIA is just pricing and gouging you now. So the price, the cost increase is passed along to you. And that's why the 40 series pricing was reportedly, and we talked about this back in like June or July, the 40 series pricing was expected to be pretty high. I see a lot of people surprised by this pricing, and that shocks me because of the fact that there was just so much data pointing to the fact that it was going to be expensive. I'm curious, are you gonna buy? I saw a couple comments that were like, F it, I don't care, I'm buying a 4090, I'm going all out. And if you're a performance snob, that's the route to go. Because you're not gonna care about who made the product, you're not gonna care about the philosophy of the business, you're not gonna care about the price. If you have deep pockets, you just want the best. And it's gonna come at an exponentially more expensive cost to have more performance. And you wouldn't care about this video anyway, you probably already decided you're buying it. I'm just curious as to how you guys feel about the 4080 16 gig versus 4080 12 gig naming scheme. Because here's the thing now, there's not a lot of space between a 4080 12 gig and a 4080 16 gig, so they can't slot a card in there. You're gonna have two 4080 Ti's, or are we gonna have a 4080 12 gig, a 4080 16 gig, and a 4080 Ti? Are you gonna have three 4080s this time around? That's gonna be weird. 4070 now, you know is gonna cost at least $600 to $700, probably $700 if it comes to that point. And you know there's gonna be a 4080 Ti. You just know it, because there's too big of a gap. 16,384 CUDA cores versus 9,728. Funny thing is that's the 4080 16 gig actually has less CUDA cores than the 30 series, but generational improvement on the new 4N process, or the new 4N from TSMC, is gonna be so much faster, obviously. But again, if they would just try to look consumer-centric for once, they might not have so much negative backlash in everything that they do. Great products made by a company that just seems so far removed from the consumer now, it's not even funny. And as a fan of NVIDIA products, I'm so conflicted. Anyway, sound off down below how you guys feel about this. If you hadn't heard about this, I'm sure the videos about this have been existing since yesterday. I just went and put it out because I feel like it's my duty, obviously, to let the audience know, like, hey, you either care about what it's called or you don't. Because reality is, I did see comments on some of these posts about the 4080 thing saying, I don't give a crap what it's called as long as the price to performance is there and makes sense. We haven't benchmarked these yet. The 4080 12 gig being called a 4080 or 4070 at $900, if it performs really, really well, might not matter at the end of the day. It's just about the optics of what it looks like the company's trying to do to the consumer. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.